My mother-in-law thought I would never dare to get a divorce. So right there at the cocktail reception, she slapped me twice in front of everyone. She never expected that with just one phone call from me, her entire family's empire would instantly collapse on the spot. The first slap landed while the hotel ballroom was still echoing with applause, the clinking of champagne glasses, and the lively voice of the MC on stage, as if life outside was still decent and glamorous. Only I stood in a hidden corner near the banquet tables, my face knocked to one side, my ears ringing. My carefully pinned French twist had unraveled over my shoulders, and the pearl earring my mother left me flew off, rolling under a white-clothed chair. The second slap came immediately after, heavier and more brutal, as if Eleanor, my mother-in-law, had channeled 5 years of contempt into her gold-ringed palm. Her manicured nails scratched my cheek, leaving a stinging burn. I could hear her gritting her teeth, her voice not too loud but enough to make the people sitting nearby turn their heads. "Are you going to sign it or not? Do not think your silence means this family has to put up with you for the rest of your life." I stood still. I did not cry, did not flinch, did not bring my hand up to cover my face. If this were me 3 years ago, perhaps I would have bowed my head and apologized without even knowing what I did wrong. If this were me a year ago, perhaps I would have run into the restroom, locked the door, bitten my lip, and cried until my sobs faded before walking back out as if nothing had happened. But tonight was different. Tonight, at the 15th anniversary gala of my husband's family corporation, Sterling Enterprises, surrounded by aristocratic faces, expensive tailored suits, glittering designer dresses, and fake congratulatory toasts, I suddenly found my heart strangely at peace. Eleanor wore a dark emerald velvet evening gown, a large pearl necklace resting against her collarbone, her hair styled in a flawless updo, and her makeup meticulously applied. From a distance, she truly looked like a woman of old money nobility. But from this close, I could clearly see that the thick layers of foundation could not hide the bitter cruelty in her eyes. I saw the corners of her crimson lips curl into a sharp, cold line. 5 years. For 5 years you have eaten our food, lived in our house, carried the title of our daughter-in-law, yet you could not even produce a single son. Now I am giving you a decent way out, and you dare to act high and mighty? She pulled a stack of papers from her designer clutch and threw it directly onto the table in front of me. The papers slid across the linen, the top sheet clearly bearing the words, "Divorce Settlement Agreement." I had already seen it that afternoon. The family's corporate lawyer had emailed the digital copy to my phone. The clauses were so cold and calculated that after reading them, I could only laugh. Will and I were to divorce voluntarily. My daughter, little Lily, would remain under the sole custody of her father's family. I would walk away empty-handed, forbidden from claiming any assets acquired during the marriage, including the Manhattan condo registered in Will's name, the very condo I had quietly helped pay the mortgage on over the past year, using my own personal savings. I bent down to pick up the earring from under the chair. The small pearl had a deep crack running through it, looking like a frozen teardrop. It was not a highly valuable item, just the earrings my mother wore in her youth. Before she passed away, she placed them in my hand and told me that no matter where a daughter lives, she must always hold on to her self-respect. Yet, for 5 years as a daughter-in-law, I mistakenly thought enduring humiliation meant keeping up appearances. I thought staying silent meant holding the family together. I thought taking a little less for myself would make them love me more. It turned out I was wrong. There are people who see your endurance and think you are weak, who see your kindness and assume you have nowhere else to go. Seeing that I did not brag about my parents, my property, or my money, they gave themselves the right to trample all over me. I placed the cracked earring in the palm of my hand and looked up at Eleanor. "Eleanor, tonight is Richard's major corporate gala. Are you sure you want to talk about this here?" She let out a thin, disdainful laugh. "So you still know this is a major gala? Look at yourself. Look at your cheap dress and that face that constantly acts like a victim. Do you even deserve to stand next to my son? Let me tell you this. If you know what is good for you, sign it tonight. If not, I will have my lawyers sue you until you lose both your child and your dignity." A few of the husband's relatives sitting nearby began to whisper. I recognized Aunt Susan, Richard's sister, the woman who would hold my hand every Thanksgiving and praise me for being such a sweet daughter-in-law. Now, she turned her face away as if we had never met. Another woman covered her mouth with a napkin to hide a laugh, her eyes darting to the red mark on my cheek before quickly returning to the glass of red wine in front of her. I suddenly found it hilarious. For the past 5 years, my greatest fear was divorce. I was afraid my daughter would grow up without a complete home. I was afraid my father would be heartbroken. I was afraid of society mocking me as a woman who could not keep her family together. That very fear had trapped me in a massive but freezing house, a place where every dinner was filled with judgment, a place where a little girl like my daughter made her grandmother sigh just because she could not carry on the family name, a place where my husband grew increasingly silent in the face of his wife's suffering. But those 2 slaps just shattered the cage that had imprisoned me for so long. I picked up the stack of papers, squared the edges neatly, and placed them right back into Eleanor's clutch. I am not signing it tonight. Her face darkened. You dare? I am not refusing to sign because I fear divorce. I am refusing because I have a few things I want to say clearly in front of this entire family. After saying that, I turned and walked toward the main table. Eleanor froze for a beat, then immediately chased after me, grabbing my wrist. Her nails dug deep into my skin. You want to make a scene, don't you? I am warning you. If you dare to embarrass the Sterling family tonight, I will make sure your entire family never knows peace again. That poor Midwestern hick town of yours is not even worth my family stepping a foot in. I looked at the hand gripping my wrist, looked at the green emerald ring she always boasted her son bought for her, and slowly pried her fingers off me one by one. You are right. The Sterling family is rich. My family does not like to show off. But there is one thing you never considered. She frowned. What thing? I looked straight into her eyes. You never truly knew who my family was. She hesitated, but only for a very brief moment, before the arrogance washed back over her face. Because the truth was, she didn't know, and neither did Will. When we were dating, he asked what my family did. I simply told him my father ran a small business in the Midwest. Hearing that, he nodded and never asked again. After the wedding, my in-laws naturally treated me like a provincial girl who was incredibly lucky to marry into wealth. And I, wanting a normal life and not wanting my marriage tangled up in my father's money, never bothered to explain. The main table was situated right near the stage. My father-in-law, Richard, was raising a glass with several key investors, his face flushed with wine and pride. As the CEO of Sterling Enterprises, a giant in real estate and construction, he was hosting tonight's gala at the Grand Plaza in New York to showcase his status after years of massive profits. He saw me approaching, and the smile on his lips stiffened slightly. Emma, whatever the issue is, let's talk about it at home later. I stood before the table, gave a slight nod to the guests, and spoke in a calm voice. I apologize for interrupting everyone. My name is Emma, Will's wife, daughter-in-law of the Sterling family. Just moments ago, my mother-in-law slapped me twice and tried to force me to sign a divorce agreement right here at this gala. I just want to make things absolutely clear, once and for all, in front of all the witnesses here. The entire table fell dead silent. Richard jumped to his feet. Emma, are you drunk? Where is Will? Take your wife home right now. From behind, Will rushed over, his tie crooked, reeking of alcohol. The first thing he did was not to look at the bruise on my face, but to grab my arm and hiss softly. What are you doing? Do you have any idea how important tonight is? I looked at the man I had once loved enough to risk everything to marry. Your mother slapped me, and you don't even ask if I am hurt? Will paused for a second, then turned to his mother. Eleanor replied immediately with a cold face. I slapped her, so what? An ungrateful daughter-in-law who can't even give us a grandson, clinging to our family and refusing to leave. What is wrong with me teaching her a lesson? Will pressed his lips together. He looked at his mother, looked at his father, looked at the silent guests, and then turned back to me. Emma, let's just go home and talk. Consider it a favor to me. Please don't blow this out of proportion. I smiled faintly. Your family always tells me not to blow things out of proportion. Your mother scolds me. You tell me to let it go. Your mother throws away the dinner I cooked. You tell me to let it go. Your mother insults our daughter in front of the relatives. You tell me to let it go. Today, your mother slaps me in front of all these people, and you still tell me to let it go. But Will, I didn't come here tonight to let it go. I came here to end it. After saying that, I took out my phone. Under the astonished gazes of my in-laws, I dialed a number I had saved for a very long time but rarely used, even in my weakest moments. The phone rang twice before someone answered. Dad. My voice was still calm, but my throat had tightened. I am at the Grand Plaza Hotel, at my in-laws' corporate gala. They hit me. They are forcing me to divorce. Can you come pick me up? The other end of the line went silent for a few seconds. Then, an older, deep, and steady male voice rang out, emphasizing every single word. I will be there in 10 minutes. I hung up. Eleanor scoffed. What can your father do by coming here? Is some old man from the Midwest going to march into Manhattan and back you up? Emma, stop acting. Your father's pension probably isn't even enough to cover one dinner table here. I didn't reply. I pulled out a chair, sat down, placed the cracked pearl earring on the table, folded my hands over my knees, and quietly waited. And for the first time in 5 years, I no longer felt utterly alone. The entire ballroom had fallen quiet in a very strange way. It was not the formal silence of a grand gala, but the kind of silence when people smell a scandal brewing but no one dares to speak. The piano on stage was still playing softly. The MC stood near the podium holding the microphone, his eyes glued to the main table. A few guests who had been raising their glasses slowly set them down. Meanwhile, I remained seated on the white-clothed chair, my hands on my lap, the cracked pearl earring sitting in front of me like a tiny period marking the end of 5 agonizingly long years of submission. Eleanor still stood there, her posture straight, her chin slightly raised, trying to maintain her familiar arrogance. But I could see her hands gripping her clutch so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. Though her mouth remained tough, internally, she was growing extremely uncomfortable with my absolute calm. The woman who was used to seeing me bow my head, used to hearing me say yes, ma'am, used to seeing me swallow my tears, suddenly could not understand why tonight I could sit there, the slap mark still red on my face, my eyes still watering from the pain, yet keeping my back perfectly straight and my gaze unwavering. Will stood next to me, his expression a mix of anger and panic. He reached out wanting to pull me up one more time, but stopped when he saw the VIP guests at the main table watching. Perhaps at that moment, what filled his mind was not concern for his wife, not worry for my pain, but the sheer terror that this drama would become a permanent stain on the gala his father had spent a month planning. So he leaned down, forcing his voice to soften, speaking as if coaxing a stubborn child. Emma, I know you are hurt, but please stop doing this. Whatever the issue is, we will solve it at home. Whatever you want, I will talk to my mother about it. But right now, stand up. I will take you home first. I looked up at him, looking at the face that once made me believe I could entrust him with my whole life, looking at the eyes that used to be so gentle when we fell in love, now holding nothing but impatience and blame. Then I asked very softly, Will, if the person who got slapped today was your mother, would you tell her to go home and talk about it later? Will was speechless. The question wasn't loud, but it was enough for the people nearby to hear. Richard immediately furrowed his brow, his sharp gaze sweeping over to me as if wanting to use his authority as the host to crush the situation down. But there are things that, once shattered, can never be pieced back together perfectly. Just like the pearl on my mother's earring, even if repaired, the internal crack would remain. Seeing her son struck speechless, Eleanor grew even more furious. She stepped forward, pointing a finger right in my face. Do not ever compare yourself to his mother like that. I am his mother, and you are his wife. There is a massive difference. A wife can be replaced by someone else, but a man only has one mother. You have been in my house for 5 years, always speaking so softly, yet your heart is this deceitful. Calling your father here tonight, what do you plan to do? Bring your whole impoverished family up here to leech off us? I sat perfectly still, not responding to those toxic words, because I knew there are arguments that only cheapen you the more you speak. The truth does not need to push its way in with screaming. It will walk in on its own at the exact right moment, calm enough, clear enough, and powerful enough to make those who once looked down on you remember it for the rest of their lives. And exactly 10 minutes later, the grand doors of the ballroom opened. Not opened gently. The heavy wooden double doors were pushed wide open by the hotel staff. Against the bright white light of the hallway corridor, emerged the silhouette of an older man. He wore a simple, dark gray tailored suit, his hair almost entirely silver, his stature not overly tall but his posture impeccably straight, his footsteps slow but incredibly firm. Behind him walked 2 people, a middle-aged man wearing glasses and holding a brown leather briefcase, and a woman in her 40s dressed in a sharp black business suit, her expression composed, her eyes sharp, like someone accustomed to handling massive crises in total silence. The moment I saw him, my heart felt like it was gently squeezed. It was my father, Arthur. The man my husband's family always assumed was just a country bumpkin doing petty trade in the Midwest. The man Eleanor had repeatedly mocked, saying that a maternal family that couldn't provide financial backing shouldn't demand a voice. The man even Will never truly bothered to understand. Because Will thought I came from an ordinary background, He believed that me marrying him was already my greatest stroke of luck. My father walked past the dead silent banquet tables, not looking at anyone, not needing anyone to introduce him. His gaze stopped on my face, resting exactly on the red, swollen mark on my left cheek and the small scratch near my earlobe. In just a single second, I saw those tired, older eyes darken. It was not loud, not a sudden outburst of rage, but it felt as if a deep, violent undercurrent had just surged within him. He stopped right in front of me, his voice dropping low. "Who hit you?" Before I could answer, Eleanor let out a cold laugh, perhaps because she still hadn't recognized who the man standing in front of her was. Or rather, she was so used to judging people by their flashy appearances and shallow rumors that seeing my father arrive without a massive entourage of bodyguards or flashy displays of wealth, she instantly regained her arrogance. "I hit her, so what? You are her father, right? You arrived right on time. You need to teach your daughter a lesson. A daughter-in-law who doesn't know her place, causing a scene while her husband's family is hosting a major corporate gala. The kind of girl you raised must have been spoiled rotten back in your house." My father did not look at her right away. He simply reached down, picked up the cracked pearl earring from the table, placed it in the palm of my hand, and gently said, "Put this away, sweetheart. Don't leave things your mother gave you resting on other people's tables." Just that one sentence made a bitter lump form in my throat. I clutched the earring tightly, my eyes burning, but I tried my hardest not to cry because I had already made my decision. Tonight, I did not want to be a pitiful, tragic woman in front of the world. I wanted to be a woman who had the right to walk away from a marriage that hurt her without needing to bow her head and ask for permission. Richard finally took a good look at my father. Initially, his face only showed annoyance at a stranger crashing his party, but very rapidly, his expression shifted. The wine glass in his hand trembled slightly. He looked at my father, looked at the middle-aged man behind him, and then looked at the woman in black who was now opening an iPad. The color drained from Richard's face, turning from wine-flushed red to a ghostly pale white. "Arthur." Richard's voice shook so noticeably that the people sitting close by all picked up on it. Eleanor whipped her head around to stare at her husband. "You know him?" Richard did not answer immediately. He swallowed hard, quickly stepped out from behind his chair, his hands instinctively adjusting his suit jacket like a subordinate preparing to meet someone of vastly superior status. "Arthur, I truly did not know. I did not know Emma was your daughter." That statement was like a boulder thrown into a tense, silent lake. Whispers instantly rippled across the entire ballroom. Some people turned to ask each other which Arthur he was. Some had already recognized him, their faces displaying pure shock. Because in the construction and infrastructure industries of the East Coast, the name Arthur was not one to be mentioned lightly. My father did not like appearing in newspapers, nor did he like showing off his wealth. But Apex Holdings, the company he built from scratch over more than 30 years, controlled a massive chain of materials, manufacturing, logistics, and major infrastructure projects. As for Richard's Sterling Enterprises, to be brutally honest, for the past few years, they had relied heavily on the supply chains and commercial credit lines from satellite companies linked to Apex Holdings just to stay afloat. Hearing this, Eleanor's face went rigid, but she still tried to defend herself. "Apex Holdings, so what? Does having money give you the right to come here and threaten people? This is our family business. If a daughter-in-law doesn't know her place, her mother-in-law will teach her. What law forbids that?" The man with glasses behind my father stepped forward and placed a business card on the table, his voice perfectly even. "Good evening, Eleanor. I am James Davis, legal counsel representing Emma and Arthur's family. The fact that you physically assaulted someone in a public space, attempted to force the signing of a divorce settlement containing highly disadvantageous clauses, and simultaneously threatened to strip a biological mother of her custody rights can all be documented as legal evidence. We are not here to threaten anyone. We are here to protect our client under the full extent of the law." The woman in the black suit also stepped forward, opening her iPad, her tone calm but every word piercingly clear. "I am Sarah, head of independent auditing for Apex Holdings. Since I am here, I would also like to inform Richard that all supply contracts between entities affiliated with Apex and Sterling Enterprises will be put under full review starting tomorrow morning, specifically regarding 3 overdue debt accounts, 2 guarantee files, and 1 project showing signs of capital misuse contrary to contractual commitments. We will conduct all future business via formal written correspondence, not through verbal chats at banquet tables." Richard stumbled half a step backward, his hand gripping the edge of the table. I clearly saw the panic radiating from his face. The man who had sat in the host chair, who had remained silent when my mother-in-law verbally abused me, who had treated my endurance as a minor household matter. Now, he finally understood that what he called a family matter had just struck the very foundation of his corporate empire. Will stood stiffly beside me, the alcohol haze vanishing entirely from his eyes. He looked at me, his lips trembling. "Emma, why did you never tell me?" I looked at him for a long time. My heart no longer ached the way it used to. There was only an exhausted emptiness left. I wanted you to love me because I was Emma, not because I was my father's daughter. But it turns out, when you didn't know who stood behind me, you and your family treated me like someone who had absolutely no one to rely on. Will bowed his head, unable to say a word. My father turned to Richard, his voice not loud, but at the main table, no one dared to interrupt. "Richard, my daughter married into your family for 5 years. I never demanded your family revere her because she is my child. I only hoped she would live a decent life as a wife, a mother, a normal human being. But tonight, your wife hit my child in front of a crowd. Your son stands here only worrying about losing face. And you just want to sweep this under the rug to get it over with. So from now on, we don't talk about sentiments anymore. We only talk about the law and responsibility." Eleanor's voice trembled. "What do you want?" My father looked at the red mark on my cheek, then answered slowly. "I want my daughter to get a proper, honorable divorce. Full custody of Lily goes to her mother. Marital assets will be divided strictly according to the law, and the private funds my child invested into the condo must be clearly refunded. And there must be an apology. You don't need to get on your knees. I did not raise my child to take the humiliation of others to patch up her own wounds, but you must apologize to her in front of the very people you humiliated her before." That sentence made me burst into tears. Not out of weakness, but because after 5 years, someone finally stood in front of me and told me that I did not need to become cruel in order to get justice. Eleanor's lips trembled violently, while Richard closed his eyes, looking as if he had just lost every ounce of prestige he had meticulously built for this gala night. Will took a step forward, his voice raspy. "Arthur, please give me one more chance, can you?" My father did not answer for me. He simply turned to look at me, his eyes softening. "You decide, sweetheart. I won't force your life." I stood up, looked at Will, looked at my mother-in-law, looked at my father-in-law, looked at the entire ballroom that had witnessed me being slapped, yet remained silent, and enunciated every single word clearly. "I am getting a divorce, and this time I am not walking away empty-handed, nor will I let anyone use my daughter as a bargaining chip anymore." After I spoke those words, the entire ballroom fell into a silence heavier than even when my father first appeared. Because everyone understood one thing. There are marriages where, if people are still arguing, it means they still want to save it. But when a woman calmly utters the word divorce in a voice completely devoid of tears and blame, that is usually the moment everything has truly reached its definitive end. Will stood paralyzed in that empty space, his bloodshot eyes staring at me as if desperately trying to find the woman who had once forgiven him time and time again. The woman who endured his mother, endured the bitter insults, spent countless sleepless nights taking care of their child alone while he was entertaining clients, going on business trips, or simply choosing to drink with his friends rather than come home. But he looked for a very long time and still could not find that woman anymore. Because that woman had slowly died over the past 5 years. Died from every moment of being disrespected, died from every moment of being neglected, died from every cry for help that was only met with the words, "Just let it go." Richard slumped back into his chair, his face aging 10 years in a single evening. As for Eleanor, she still stood there, her lips quivering more from rage than from remorse. Because women like her, who spent their entire lives standing above others, accustomed to using power dynamics to dictate right and wrong, the thing they could not stand the most was not losing money, but having the daughter-in-law she once despised, now standing in a position that forced her to bow her head. "Dad, I don't have anything else to say in this room." He simply instructed Lawyer James to gather all the documents, then turned to me. "Let's go home, sweetie." I nodded. But right at that moment, a tiny, innocent voice unexpectedly rang out from the entrance of the ballroom. "Mommy." I startled and turned around. Little Lily was standing there. She was wearing the pale yellow dress I bought her 2 months ago, her pigtails slightly messy, her arms still clutching the worn-out stuffed bunny she loved the most. Standing beside her was the family nanny. Looking panicked as if she had just realized something terrible was happening, my heart almost stopped. From the beginning of the evening until now, while being slapped, while being forced to sign divorce papers, while being pushed to the brink, I had tried to maintain my composure. But the moment I saw my daughter standing amidst the crowd, all my toughness instantly melted away. I rushed toward her. "Lily, why are you here?" She looked up at my face, her big, clear, childlike eyes immediately widening. "Are you hurt, Mommy?" She reached out her tiny hand and touched the red mark on my cheek. "Who hit Mommy?" No one answered. The entire ballroom was silent. Little Lily turned to look at Eleanor. "Did Grandma hit Mommy?" Eleanor's face went stiff. "Kids don't know anything. Stop talking nonsense." But Lily was not scared. She was only 5 years old and didn't fully understand adult matters. But children possess a strange ability. They always see the rawest truths. She hugged my leg. "Grandma hates Mommy. The other day she even said Mommy was bad." My entire body went rigid. My father also slightly furrowed his brow. Richard turned to glare at his wife. "What else did you say to our granddaughter?" Eleanor fumbled for a fleeting moment before instantly snapping. "Kids remember stupid things." But Lily continued. "Grandma said if Mommy leaves, Lily stays with Grandma. Grandma said Mommy doesn't want Lily anymore." Hearing that, the bridge of my nose stung. So, all this time, while I was trying to hold the family together for my child's sake, someone was quietly planting these thoughts into a little girl's head. I bent down and hugged my daughter to my chest. She buried her face in my shoulder, whispering, "Mommy, please don't leave Lily." At that moment, I truly couldn't hold it back anymore. Tears fell onto my daughter's hair. "Mommy is not leaving you. Really, really." Even if Grandma doesn't like Mommy, I hugged her tighter. No matter who doesn't like Mommy, Mommy is still Lily's mother. My father stood behind me, watching the scene with red eyes. He had lost his wife early in life. He understood the terror a child feels at the thought of losing a parent. Because of that, he understood even more deeply that everything I had endured over the past 5 years was largely for my daughter. After a moment, he gently bent down and picked his granddaughter up. "Come here. Grandpa will take Lily home, okay?" Lily looked confused. "Grandpa?" "Yes, the real Grandpa." My father smiled. His first smile since walking into the ballroom. "Really?" The little girl stared at him for a few seconds, then unexpectedly wrapped her arms around his neck. "Grandpa looks just like Mommy." The whole ballroom suddenly fell silent. Even Lawyer James cracked a faint smile. Because it was true, they looked remarkably alike, from their eyes to the bridge of their noses. It was just that for the last 5 years, no one in this family had ever bothered to look closely. The car rolled away from the hotel, leaving the chaos behind. This time, I sat next to my daughter. Lily had fallen asleep leaning against my shoulder at some point. My father sat opposite me. City lights flashed across the windows. No one spoke for quite a while. It wasn't until the car crossed the George Washington Bridge that my father slowly broke the silence. "Do you regret it?" I knew what he was asking. I looked down at the Hudson River shimmering under the city lights. Yes, he wasn't surprised. "Regret marrying Will?" I shook my head. "No." I paused for a few seconds. "I regret not protecting myself sooner." My father stayed quiet. Then he nodded. "That is right." I turned to look at him. "Are you mad at me, Dad?" He gave a soft smile. "Mad about what?" "Because you were stubborn?" "Everyone is stubborn when they are young." He looked out the window. "Years ago, when your mother insisted on marrying me, your grandfather completely opposed it. I was surprised. This was the first time he had ever mentioned that story." My father smiled. "I was dirt poor back then, didn't even own a decent car, but your mother still married me." He paused. "The difference is, when I married your mother, I never once let her cry because of my family." I bowed my head. The statement was gentle, but it felt like a knife cutting straight into the core reality of my marriage to Will. It wasn't about being poor or rich. It wasn't about coming from matching social classes. It was because that man had never truly stood by my side. The car kept driving. When we were a few minutes away from the estate, my phone buzzed. It was Will. I stared at the screen but didn't pick up. The phone buzzed again. A second time, a third time, a fourth time. I still didn't answer. By the 5th missed call, a text message popped up. "Emma, I am begging you. Let me see you just one more time." I stared at those words for a long time. If this had been a week ago, I probably would have softened. If it were a month ago, I probably would have replied immediately. If it were a year ago, I might have even blamed myself. But not now. Because some apologies arrived too late. So late that the person hearing them no longer needs them. I locked my screen. Right at that moment, Lawyer James called. Emma, there is something I think you need to know. What is it, James? James's voice dropped. Tonight, after you left? I received intel from a very specific source. What happened? He remained silent for a few seconds. The fact that the Sterling family wants to claim full custody of Lily might not just be about family sentiments. I sat up straight. What do you mean? I just received some files from someone who used to work for Sterling Enterprises. His voice slowed down. The files mention a will. My heart pounded. Whose will? The other end of the line went silent. Then James said a name that made my blood run cold. Will's grandmother Margaret. I was stunned to the core. Because grandmother Margaret had passed away over 3 years ago. And the most terrifying part was that, before she died, grandmother Margaret was the only person in the Sterling family who truly loved me. James continued. You need to prepare yourself. Why? I am afraid Eleanor forcing you to divorce is directly tied to that will. Outside the window, the endless city lights streaked by. But inside me, a different door had just swung open, revealing a secret buried for years within the Sterling family. And perhaps, that was the true reason they were in such a rush to push me out of the house. I barely slept that night. Not because of what happened at the Grand Plaza Hotel, nor because my 5-year marriage was coming to an end, but because James's last sentence kept echoing in my head like a key trying to force open a door that had been locked shut for years. The will of Will's grandmother, a woman who died over 3 years ago. The only person in the Sterling family who never looked at me with discriminatory eyes. The person who, every time Eleanor sneered at me for being poor, would speak up to put her in her place. The person who used to hug little Lily and say that whether a child was a boy or a girl, they were the flesh and blood of the family. The person who held my hand for a very long time right before she passed away. I lay on the massive bed in my father's penthouse apartment, watching the streetlights cast shadows on the ceiling, and unconsciously recalled grandmother Margaret's final days. She was over 80 then, her health rapidly declining. I was the one who took care of her the most. Not because anyone forced me to, but because I truly cared for her. On nights when she struggled to breathe, I was the one who rushed her to the emergency room. On mornings when she couldn't eat, I would sit for an hour just to spoon-feed her oatmeal. Grandmother would often hold my hand and sigh. Emma, after I am gone, you have to know how to take care of yourself. Back then, I didn't understand. I thought she was just over-worrying. Now, looking back, a very strange feeling surfaced in my heart. It was as if she knew something was going to happen. The next morning, I had just taken Lily down to the building's private courtyard to play when my phone rang. It was Lawyer James. His voice was as steady as always. Emma. Yes. I met with the informant this morning. I immediately asked, is the person trustworthy, James? Extremely. He paused for a few seconds. This person was grandmother Margaret's private secretary for over a decade. I froze. A private secretary? Yes, but I've never heard of her. Because right after Margaret passed away, she quit immediately and moved to Florida to live quietly. I felt my heart beat faster. James continued. The important thing isn't who she is, but what she kept. Is it the will? Not just the will. I paused. What else? Diaries. I was stunned. Grandmother's diaries? Yes. A cold shiver ran down my spine. I never knew grandmother Margaret kept a journal. James lowered his voice. According to the secretary, she wrote consistently during the last 10 years of her life. And in those diaries, she mentioned you. Yes. I stayed quiet. My hand unconsciously gripped the phone tighter. On the other end, James spoke slowly. In those diaries, she brought you up many times. I didn't know how to describe what I felt at that moment. Throughout my 5 years in the Sterling house, I always thought I was an outsider, unwelcome, someone who could never earn approval no matter how hard I tried. And yet, somewhere out there, on pages no one knew about, someone had been quietly recording my existence. I asked very softly, what did she write? James answered. The secretary hasn't handed over the full documents yet, but she read a passage to me. He paused for a few seconds, then recited it. That girl Emma is too kind for her own good. She is like someone walking barefoot on a gravel road, thinking that if she just endures the pain, others will pity her. I stood completely paralyzed. That was exactly how grandmother spoke. Rustic, but seeing straight through everything. A long moment later, I finally asked, "What about the will?" "The secretary will fly into New York this afternoon." Before I could say anything, James added, "But something happened first." "What?" "The Sterling family is looking for her." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "They found out about her existence last night." My heart sank. "Who told them?" "Unclear. But this morning, 2 men showed up at her address in Florida." I understood instantly. The Sterling family was panicking. If there wasn't a massive secret, they wouldn't have acted so fast. Just then, an innocent voice rang out behind me. "Mommy." I turned around. Lily was running toward me. She held a small flower she had just picked from the garden and offered it to me. I bent down and took it. In that moment, I suddenly understood why I had to be strong. Not for revenge, not for money, but because I did not want my daughter to grow up in a family where looking down on women was considered normal. My father came home early for lunch. He sat across from me in the dining room. It was just the 3 of us, me, my dad, and Lily. The atmosphere was so peaceful that I sometimes felt like I was living in a dream. Halfway through the meal, my father suddenly asked, "Do you still love Will?" I froze. The chopsticks in my hand stalled. My father wasn't looking at me. He was just putting food onto his granddaughter's plate, waiting for an answer. A long time later, I finally said, "I don't know." He nodded. "Then it's over." I looked up. "Why do you say that?" My father gave a sad smile. "When people are still in love, they always know they are still in love." I stayed silent. He was right. What remained in me now was not love, but regret. Regret for the man I once trusted, regret for my lost youth, regret for a family that could have been happy, but regret is not love. That afternoon, James called again. This time, his voice was significantly graver. "Emma." "Yes. She is here." "The secretary?" "Yes." "Did she bring the documents?" "Yes." I stood up immediately. "I am on my way." An hour later, I arrived at James's law office. Inside the small conference room, there were only 4 people. Me, James, a woman in her 50s, and my father. The woman was wearing a simple white blouse, her face kind but utterly exhausted. The moment she saw me, her eyes turned red. "You must be Emma." I nodded. She stood up and surprisingly bowed her head. "I am so sorry." I was startled. "Excuse me?" "I should have found you sooner. I had absolutely no idea what was going on." She sat back down, her hands shaking as she opened an old, worn-out tote bag and pulled out a yellowed, age-worn folder. Written in the corner of the folder in handwritten ink were the words, "Private estate, strictly do not disclose unless necessary." My heart pounded as I looked at it. The woman took a deep breath. "This is Margaret's final will." The room fell dead silent. James opened the folder, placing each page on the table. He began to read. At first, it was just standard contents. A portion of assets for the children and grandchildren, a portion for charity, a portion for scholarship funds. But when he reached the final page, his voice suddenly slowed down. I saw my father's expression change. James looked up at me. "Emma?" "Yes. I think you should read this part yourself." I took the piece of paper, my eyes scanning the familiar handwriting. Grandmother Margaret's writing was shaky but very clear. And then, my entire body froze. Because the very first line stated that if, upon my passing, my granddaughter-in-law Emma is still legally married to Will, all the secret corporate shares held in my name will be transferred entirely to Emma and my great-granddaughter Lily. I was paralyzed. Corporate shares. I kept reading further down, and the number that appeared made the entire room go silent. It wasn't a few million. It wasn't tens of millions. It was 18% of the total shares in Sterling Enterprises. A percentage large enough to make someone the second largest shareholder in the entire corporation. My hands trembled. Finally, I understood. I understood why Eleanor was in such a frantic rush for the divorce. I understood why they were so determined to take custody of Lily. I understood why, the second my father showed up, the entire Sterling family panicked. Because if this marriage continued, the person holding the true power in the future might not be the Sterling family, but me and Lily. I sat completely immobilized for a very long time in front of that yellowed folder. My hands remained planted on the edge of the table, while my eyes were locked onto the last line, as if blinking would make it all disappear, and I would wake up from this bizarre dream. 18% of Sterling Enterprises. That number wasn't just wealth. It was power. It was leverage. It was something capable of entirely flipping a person's standing within the Sterling family. Now I understood why Eleanor was suddenly so anxious for a divorce. She didn't start hating me yesterday. She didn't start hating me last year. She had hated me for a very long time. But her urgency this time didn't stem from hatred. It stemmed from fear, an overwhelming fear. James gently slid the folder closer. Emma, there is one more part you need to see. I took a deep breath and nodded. He flipped to a few pages toward the back. This time, it wasn't the will. It was an affidavit from the former secretary. Every line was clearly typed, detailing the entire process of how Margaret drafted the will, amended it, and put it in storage. The secretary recounted that 2 years before her death, the old woman had repeatedly witnessed the conflicts within the family. She knew Eleanor disliked me. She knew Will was growing more distant from his wife. She also knew many people in the family looked down on Lily just because she was a girl. That was why she decided to leave those shares to me and Lily. Not to make us rich, but to protect us. To protect a woman and a child who could be pushed out of the house at any moment. Reading this, my throat choked up. That elderly woman had foreseen a future I couldn't see. She knew I would be hurt. She knew I would be isolated. She knew that one day, I might have to stand up and defend myself. And so, she quietly prepared an escape route for me. My father sat across from me, listening in silence. He didn't interrupt. It wasn't until I set the folder down that he let out a soft sigh. Margaret had a good heart. I nodded, a pang of sorrow hitting my chest. If only she were still alive, perhaps everything would have been different. Right then, James's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen and frowned. It's Will. I looked up. He is calling you? He's been calling since this morning. James set the phone on the table. He wants to meet you. I didn't answer. A long moment later, I asked, do you think I should meet him? James thought for a few seconds. If it's as a husband and wife, no need. But if it's as two people about to divorce, then you should. I understood what he meant. Some things need a clean break, not because there is still love, but to ensure there are no lingering entanglements. That afternoon, I agreed to meet Will at a small cafe near Central Park. Not a place we used to date. I intentionally chose a completely unfamiliar spot, because old memories were of no use anymore. When I arrived, Will was already sitting there. It had only been 2 days, but he looked like he had aged several years. His dress shirt was wrinkled, a 5 o'clock shadow on his face, his eyes red from lack of sleep. I pulled out a chair and sat down. Neither of us spoke for almost a minute. Finally, Will broke the silence. Are you okay? I looked at him. Did you call me out here just to ask that? Will bowed his head. I am sorry. I wasn't surprised. I actually felt quite indifferent. There are apologies that, if spoken a few years earlier, could have saved a marriage. But not now. Will looked at me. Emma, I swear I didn't know my mother would do that. I gave a cold smile. You didn't know? Or you chose not to know? He stiffened. I continued. 5 years, Will. Did you not see your mother scolding me? Did you not see her insulting me? Did you not see her treating Lily differently? Will couldn't answer. Because he knew. He always knew. He just chose to stay silent. A long time later, his voice came out hoarse. I thought everything would eventually be fine. I looked at the man sitting across from me. That is your problem. You always thought things would fix themselves, while I was the one who had to endure it all. Will closed his eyes, his hands clenching into fists. I knew he was in pain, but that pain no longer softened my heart, because I had been in pain for far too long. A moment later, Will suddenly asked, Do you know about the will yet? I looked at him. Yes. He exhaled heavily, as if finally confirming something. I only found out this morning. Is that so? I swear I didn't know beforehand. I believed that. If Will had known, he wouldn't have looked so utterly bewildered at the gala. But that didn't change anything. Will looked at me. Emma, I want you to believe one thing. What is it? Whether that will existed or not, I never married you for money. I nodded slightly. I know. He looked up. Surprised. I spoke calmly. I never thought you married me for money. Then why? But you never protected me out of love, either. That sentence left him dead silent. Because it was the truth. The truth often doesn't need to be shouted. It just needs to be spoken at the right time. Will sat perfectly still for a very long time. Then he pulled a folder out of his briefcase and set it in front of me. What is this? The condo documents. I was taken aback. What do you mean? The condo was in my name. My heart skipped a beat. Will took a deep breath. Honestly, that condo was bought with both our money. I have asked my lawyers to draft the paperwork to transfer half the title to your name. I looked at him. For the first time in a very long time, I saw Will do the right thing. Not for money, but for fairness, he continued. There is also a savings account. All the money you gave me for the mortgage payments over the years, I calculated it all, including bank interest. I didn't say anything, because I knew doing this was not easy for Will. It meant he was directly defying his mother's wishes. But it was still too late. A moment later, I gently pushed the folder back. I will let my lawyers handle it. Will nodded. He didn't argue. He understood that the distance between us now wasn't something a few explanations could bridge. It was 5 years of damage. Before I stood up to leave, Will called out, "Emma." I turned my head. He looked at me for a very long time, then asked, "Were you ever happy marrying me?" I stayed silent for a few seconds, then smiled. A very light smile. "Yes." Will's eyes turned red. I continued, "If I was never happy, I wouldn't have tried to hold on to this marriage for so long." After saying that, I turned and walked away. This time, no one called me back. Outside the cafe, the breeze coming off Central Park was very gentle. I had only taken a few steps when my phone buzzed. "It was James," I answered. His voice came through immediately. "Emma, we have a problem." My heart dropped. "What is it?" "The former secretary just got into an accident." I froze. "An accident? Is it serious?" James's voice turned heavy. "The issue isn't her condition." "Then what is it?" He paused for a few seconds before articulating each word. "The car that hit her fled the scene. And right before the accident, an unidentified person showed up at the hotel she was staying at." My blood ran cold. Because for the first time, I clearly felt that the secret surrounding the will wasn't just a dispute over assets. Behind it, there might be a much larger truth. A truth someone was doing everything in their power to bury. The news of Martha, the former secretary, getting into an accident left me standing frozen on the sidewalk near the park for quite a while. The evening breeze was still rippling the surface of the lake. Pedestrians were still strolling by. Young couples were still pushing strollers, completely unaware that somewhere out there, secrets powerful enough to upend multiple lives were unraveling. And for me, I realized for the first time that the conflict between me and the Sterling family was no longer just a simple divorce. I immediately headed to the hospital with James. The former secretary, Martha, had suffered a fractured arm and some soft tissue injuries, but thankfully, nothing life-threatening. When I walked into the hospital room, she was lying in bed, her face pale but her mind fully alert. The moment she saw me, her eyes teared up. "You're here." I pulled up a chair and sat down. "Are you okay?" Martha shook her head. "I'm fine. They wanted to scare me more than they wanted to kill me." James, standing nearby, asked softly, "Did you see the driver?" Martha stayed quiet for a few seconds, then nodded. I didn't see the face clearly. But the person who showed up at the hotel, Martha's eyes suddenly changed. I realized it wasn't a look of fear, but the look of someone confirming a suspicion. I know who it was. Both James and I looked at her. "Who was it?" Martha gripped her blanket tightly. "It was Eleanor's former driver." I was stunned. James furrowed his brow. "Are you sure?" "I worked with the Sterling family for over 10 years. I couldn't mistake him for anyone else." The hospital room went completely silent. If what Martha said was true, then things were escalating far beyond what I had anticipated. Eleanor might hate me, might want to force a divorce, but sending someone to track down a witness immediately after the secret of the will was exposed meant she was genuinely terrified. My father arrived at the hospital an hour later. He didn't say much, just asked about Martha's condition, and quietly arranged for private security outside her room. Before leaving, he turned to look at me. "You and Lily stay indoors tonight." I understood what he meant. This had started to cross the line of a family dispute. That night, after putting Lily to sleep, I stood on the balcony of the penthouse. The city below was brilliantly lit, but only one question occupied my mind. If the Sterling family was this afraid of the will, could there be something else I didn't know? Around 10 p.m., my phone rang again. This time, It was an unknown number. I picked up. The other end stayed silent for a few seconds before Richard's voice came through. Emma, it's Dad. I wasn't surprised. Sooner or later, he was going to call. Yes. Richard's voice sounded significantly raspy. I want to meet. Is something wrong? I just want to talk. I stayed quiet. He continued. Just the two of us. Does Eleanor know? Richard gave a sad chuckle. If your mother-in-law knew, I wouldn't be calling at this hour. I thought about it for a long time, and finally agreed. The meeting took place the next morning at a quiet, old coffee shop tucked away in Greenwich Village. When I arrived, Richard was already seated. It had only been a few days, but he looked noticeably older. His hair grayer, his posture no longer as upright as before. He saw me walk in and stood up. Have a seat, sweetie. It had been a very long time since he called me that, but strangely, I didn't feel the same emotional pull I used to. Perhaps my heart was just too exhausted. After the coffee was brought out, Richard stared at the table for a long while before speaking. I am sorry. I didn't say anything, he continued. All these years, I knew my wife treated you poorly. I looked up. This was the first time he had admitted it. I knew. He nodded. I knew. Then why didn't you say anything? Richard laughed bitterly. Because I was weak. I was surprised. Richard had always been the epitome of a powerful man. Yet right now, sitting across from me, was just an aging father facing his own mistakes. He slowly recounted his past. It turned out that in his youth, he had lost everything once. Back then, it was Eleanor's family that helped him rebuild his career. Because of that debt of gratitude, for over 30 years, he had always yielded to his wife. At first, it was just yielding. Then it became a habit. And eventually, it turned into silence. I thought as long as the family stayed intact, minor issues could be overlooked. He sighed. But it turns out, every time I stayed silent, you were the one who paid the price. I didn't blame him anymore. Because some people aren't bad. They are just too cowardly to speak up when it matters. Richard looked at me. Emma, let me ask you honestly, yes. Do you know why she hates you so much? I shook my head. He smiled faintly. Because she is afraid. I froze. Afraid? He nodded. When Margaret was still alive, she always adored you. Adored you more than Will. I was shocked, Richard continued. My mother once said that if Sterling Enterprises was handed over to someone like you in the future, she would feel much safer than handing it to her own blood. I was paralyzed. I never knew this. Richard looked out the window. My wife overheard that. From that day on, she started resenting you. I sat perfectly still. So the root of it all didn't start with me having a daughter, nor did it start with my background. It started with the fear of losing control. Richard bowed his head. I am not defending her. But I want you to know the truth. I was just about to ask more when Richard's phone suddenly rang. He looked at the screen, his expression changing instantly. It's the hospital. My heart sank. He answered. Just a few seconds later, his face went ghostly pale. I jumped to my feet. What's wrong? Richard looked at me, his voice trembling. Martha is missing. My blood ran cold. Missing? He nodded. Her family went to the hospital, and she wasn't there. I immediately called James. He picked up very quickly. I'm on my way. What happened, James? James's voice was deadly serious. The hospital cameras caught a woman entering her room around 6:00 a.m. Who? He paused for 2 seconds, then said, Eleanor. I almost dropped my phone. Outside the cafe, the sunlight was sparkling across the street. But inside, I felt an icy chill. For the first time, I understood just how desperate my former mother-in-law was. And the more desperate she became, the more likely she was to do the unthinkable. Meanwhile, somewhere in this massive city, Martha, along with grandmother Margaret's final secret, had vanished without a trace. The news of Martha disappearing from the hospital was like a massive boulder thrown into a lake already churning with undercurrents, making everyone trying to keep their composure realize that this had crossed into entirely different territory. Richard, James, and I practically arrived at the hospital at the exact same time. The 6th-floor hallway was fully lit. Nurses were walking around normally. Patients in adjacent rooms were chatting with their families. But the room where Martha had been staying was chillingly empty. The blanket on the bed was pulled to one side. A half-empty water cup still sat on the nightstand, and the phone she used to contact James had been left behind. The hospital administrator brought up the security footage. We all sat in the security office to review it. The image was quite clear. Around 6:10 a.m., Eleanor appeared in the hallway. She wore a wide-brimmed hat and a surgical mask, but anyone who knew her could easily recognize her. She stood outside the room for nearly 3 minutes before walking in. 20 minutes later, she walked out alone. 15 minutes after that, a camera by the elevators captured Martha, wearing a coat and a hat, walking alongside a middle-aged man. The two left the hospital through a side exit. James replayed the footage multiple times, finally freezing it on the man's face. Richard took one look and went pale. "I know this man." I turned to him. "Who is it, Dad?" Richard sat in silence for a few seconds before answering. "It's Tom." "Which Tom?" "The Tom who was your mother-in-law's personal driver for over 10 years. I instantly remembered. The man was in his 50s, a man of few words, his face always stoic. During my early years as a daughter-in-law, whenever Eleanor traveled, he was the one driving. James immediately asked, "When did he quit?" "Almost 2 years ago. The reason?" Richard gave a bitter smile. "She fired him." "Why?" "Because he knew too much." That answer silenced the entire room. I felt a chill run down my spine. Knew too much. A simple phrase, but enough to spawn countless suspicions. James closed his laptop. "I don't think Martha is in immediate danger." I looked at him. "How can you be so sure? If they wanted to silence her, they wouldn't have walked her out so publicly." He thought for a moment before continuing. "They are looking for something." My heart tightened. "Grandmother's diary. It's highly likely." Right then, Richard's phone rang. He checked the screen and immediately stood up to step outside. Through the glass window, I saw his expression changing constantly. Sometimes surprised, sometimes angry, and sometimes looking as if he had just heard something unbelievable. About 5 minutes later, he came back in, looking much heavier. "What is it, Dad?" Richard sat down. "Will just called." I subtly clenched my hands. Even though I had decided to divorce, his name still made my heart sink slightly. Richard looked at me. "He said your mother-in-law hasn't been home since this morning." "Not at home?" "No." "Has anyone tried calling her?" "No." Richard sighed. "Ever since the gala, she has barely spoken to anyone. She locked herself in her room for 2 days, and then vanished this morning." I sat in silence. For some reason, an unnameable anxiety began creeping into my heart. I hated what Eleanor had done to me. I was pained by the damage she caused. But I never wished harm upon her, because at the end of the day, I had called her mom for 5 years. That afternoon, I returned to my father's penthouse with a heavy heart. Lily was sitting in the living room, coloring with her grandfather. The moment she saw me, she ran over and hugged my leg. "Mommy's home." I bent down and kissed her hair. "Were you good today?" "Yes." "I was good," she beamed. "Grandpa told me stories about when Mommy was Lily's age." I looked over at my father. He was wearing his reading glasses, browsing a newspaper, the corner of his lips slightly upturned. That peaceful scene soothed me tremendously. That night, after Lily fell asleep, I went into my father's home office. He was reviewing a thick file. Seeing me walk in, he closed it. "You're not asleep yet? I wanted to ask you something, Dad." He nodded. I sat down across from him. "Do you think Eleanor is behind all of this?" He remained quiet for a long time, then shook his head. "Not entirely." I was surprised. "What do you mean?" He leaned back in his chair. "A woman might do a lot of wrong things out of greed, but some of these actions exceed her capabilities." I understood what he meant. Tracking Martha down, finding her location, moving her out right under James's nose, it was all executed too professionally. "It didn't seem like Eleanor's style," my father continued. "Someone is helping her." "Who?" "I don't know yet." He looked at me. "But that person is the real danger." I couldn't sleep again that night. Around 1:00 a.m., my phone suddenly buzzed. It was a text message from an unknown number. It contained exactly one line. "If you want to know the truth about Will's grandmother, come alone to the abandoned chapel in Staten Island at 8:00 a.m. tomorrow." I read the text over and over again. No sender's name, no additional information. But what caught my attention was the first sentence. The truth about Grandmother Margaret. Not the will, not the shares, but the truth. The next morning, I showed the message to James. He objected immediately. Absolutely not. Why? It's too dangerous. I knew he was right, but my intuition told me this meeting was critical. After some debate, we compromised. I would go to the location, but James and my father's security team would be stationed nearby. At exactly 8:00 a.m., I stood in front of the abandoned chapel. The area had been deserted for years. The brick walls were peeling, the weeds overgrown, the air so quiet I could hear the wind rustling the leaves. I waited for about 10 minutes before hearing footsteps from behind. I turned around. The person standing there wasn't Martha, nor was it Eleanor. It was Will. I froze. Will looked at me with utterly exhausted eyes. I knew you would come. You sent the text. He nodded. I instantly felt a wave of disappointment. Will, what are you doing? I had no other choice. He took a step forward. There are things I couldn't say over the phone. I stayed quiet. Will took a deep breath. Emma, grandmother didn't die from illness. My whole body stiffened. What are you talking about? Will looked me straight in the eyes, his voice raspy. A week before she died, she asked to see me privately. She told me, if anything ever happens, you must protect Emma and Lily. My heart pounded. Then what? Will bowed his head, but I couldn't do it. I looked at him. For the first time in years, I saw genuine, raw remorse on this man's face. He looked up, his eyes bloodshot. Emma, I just found an audio recording. What recording? Grandmother's last recording before she died. The air around us seemed to stand still. I remained motionless. With trembling hands, Will pulled a small USB drive from his pocket. On here is the name of the person you need to watch out for the most. I stared at the USB. My intuition told me the biggest secret of the Sterling family was finally about to be exposed. But right at that moment, from behind the crumbling walls of the old chapel, the screech of tires braking abruptly shattered the silence. Then a panicked scream. Watch out! Before I could turn my head, I saw a motorcycle barreling straight toward Will at high speed. As the scream died down, the bike shot forward like an arrow released from a bow. Everything happened so fast that all I caught was a glint of metal flashing under the sunlight. Will turned around on reflex. The distance between him and the motorcycle was merely a few yards. I never thought I would experience a moment like this in my life. A moment where my mind went completely blank. No love, no hatred, no right, no wrong, no blame. Just a primal instinct to pull another human being out of harm's way. I lunged forward. At the exact same time, two of James's security men emerged from behind the ruined walls. One shouted loudly, the other sprinted toward the bike. The rider probably hadn't expected the area to be under surveillance. Startled, he yanked the handlebars. The tires screeched violently against the pavement. The bike skidded sideways and crashed hard into the roadside brush. The rider tumbled onto the ground. Because I had yanked Will out of the direct path, he merely grazed the edge of the brick wall, suffering only minor scrapes on his arm. Within seconds, the entire space became a chaotic blur, like a film put on fast forward. James's men immediately pinned the rider down. I was still gasping for air, my hands shaking. Will looked at me, his eyes full of astonishment. Perhaps he himself couldn't understand why the woman who had just demanded a divorce was the first to lunge in and save his life. I let go of his arm. Are you hurt? Will shook his head. I'm okay. I didn't say anything else, because I knew very well that what I just did didn't mean I wanted to get back together. It simply meant I had never been the kind of person who could watch someone get hurt and do nothing. The man on the motorcycle was detained quickly. His mask fell off, revealing a face in its late 40s. He struggled for a bit before helplessly slumping onto the ground. James arrived moments later. He looked down at the man for a few seconds, then turned to Will. Do you recognize him? Will studied him closely and shook his head. I've never seen him before. But right then, the man suddenly looked up at Will and gave a cold smirk. That smirk made everyone freeze. Because it wasn't the look of a hired thug caught in the act. It was the smirk of someone who knew entirely too much. Mr. Sterling, long time no see. Will's expression instantly changed. Who are you? The man laughed. You don't remember me, but I remember you. He turned to look at me. And you must be Emma. I frowned. You know me? I know. The man nodded. I know you, and I know your daughter. The atmosphere instantly turned hostile. James signaled his men to put the guy in the car before a crowd could form. The USB drive Will brought was secured safely. We left the abandoned chapel and headed straight to James's law office. Once there, The first thing everyone did was access the contents of the USB. I sat next to my father. Will sat across from us. The room was dead silent. James plugged the USB into his laptop. There was only one audio file in the folder, dated over 3 years ago, right around the time grandmother Margaret passed away. He hit play. At first, there was only slight static. Then a frail, elderly, but incredibly familiar voice spoke. It was grandmother Margaret. I unconsciously gripped my hands tightly. Even Will's eyes grew red. Her voice was slow. I don't know how much longer I have to live. The room was so quiet you could hear people breathing. But if I don't speak up about a few things, someone is going to pay the price later. I felt my heart beating wildly. Grandmother paused, then continued. First, the shares I left for Emma and Lily are my final decision. No one is allowed to change it. Everyone exchanged glances. This confirmed the will was authentic. But the next part was what paralyzed everyone. We left the abandoned chapel and headed straight to James's law office, where Richard had just arrived. Once there, the first thing everyone did was access the contents of the USB. I sat next to my father. Will sat across from us, and Richard was seated nearby. The room was dead silent. James plugged the USB into his laptop. There was only one audio file in the folder, dated over 3 years ago, right around the time grandmother Margaret passed away. He hit play. At first, there was only slight static. Then, a frail, elderly, but incredibly familiar voice spoke. It was grandmother Margaret. I unconsciously gripped my hands tightly. Even Will's eyes grew red. Her voice was slow. I don't know how much longer I have to live. The room was so quiet you could hear people breathing. But if I don't speak up about a few things, someone is going to pay the price later. I felt my heart beating wildly. Grandmother paused, then continued. First, the shares I left for Emma and Lily are my final decision. No one is allowed to change it. Everyone exchanged glances. This confirmed the will was authentic. But the next part was what paralyzed everyone. The second secret is about the Southgate project. Richard's face instantly changed. I saw it clearly, as if he had just heard something he never expected. Grandmother's voice continued. That year, someone embezzled funds. The second secret is about the Southgate project. Richard's face instantly changed. I saw it clearly, as if he had just heard something he never expected. Grandmother's voice continued. That year, someone embezzled funds. The entire room held its breath. I entrusted the documents proving this to Martha. I looked over at James. He was frowning. Clearly, this was vastly bigger than just corporate shares. Embezzlement meant this was no longer a family dispute. Grandmother's voice began to weaken. The person who took the money wasn't Emma, wasn't Lily, wasn't Will. I heard Will exhale sharply. But right as everyone was waiting for the next name, the recording abruptly cut off. An error message popped up on the screen indicating the file was corrupted. The room fell dead silent. The name of the most important person was gone, leaving only empty air. Will jumped up. That's it? James checked the file again. Yes, impossible. Will shook his head. Grandmother kept speaking. He practically yelled. But the file had ended. My father spoke in a deep voice. Someone cut the end of the track. No one disagreed, as it was the most obvious conclusion. Right then, James's phone rang. He picked it up, his expression shifting by the second. When he hung up, he looked at us. News from the police. Martha? I asked. He nodded. She was found. I breathed a sigh of relief, but James didn't look relieved at all. She walked into the precinct herself. I was stunned. By herself? Yes. Then where did she go? James looked at me. She said she was taken by someone. Who? Eleanor. The room fell silent. But the next sentence was even more shocking. And Eleanor saved her. I thought I misheard. Saved? James nodded. According to Martha, someone was trying to steal grandmother Margaret's final diary. Eleanor found out first, so she took Martha to hide her. I was completely dumbfounded. Everything in my head tangled into a knot. All these days, I truly believed Eleanor was the mastermind. And now, the narrative took a completely different turn. My father slowly asked, "Who wants the diary?" James looked around the room and said, "Martha doesn't know the name, but she knows it's a man, around 60 years old, and a former executive at Sterling Enterprises." I turned to look at Richard. Richard had gone pale. A name had obviously popped into his head, a name that made his hands start to shake. I had never seen him so terrified. And in that moment, I understood that the biggest secret of the Sterling family was finally about to be revealed. But the prime suspect wasn't Eleanor. It was someone else. Someone no one had even thought of. The conference room sank into a prolonged silence after James spoke. No one said a word right away. Everyone understood that when the final layers of fog dissipate, what emerges is rarely what you expect. For days, all suspicion had been pointed at Eleanor. She slapped me at the gala, forced the divorce, tried to take custody of Lily, and showed up at Martha's hospital room. But if what Martha told the police was true, the woman was actually trying to secure Grandmother Margaret's final diary. Richard sat frozen in his chair, his hands clasped tightly together. I had never seen him this tense. In my 5 years as his daughter-in-law, he was always the calmest person in the house. Whether the company hit rough waters or the family fought, he rarely showed emotion. Yet now, the color was visibly draining from his face. My father looked at him for a while, then slowly asked, "Who are you thinking of?" Richard looked up. His eyes wavered for a few seconds before he exhaled heavily. "I am not entirely sure, but I have a suspect." Richard fell silent. James didn't push him. A long moment passed before Richard finally spoke. "Back when we launched the Southgate project, besides me and Will's mother, there was another person running things." I looked at him. "Who?" Richard gave a bitter, cynical smile. "My brother." I froze. From the moment I stepped into the Sterling family until now, I had almost never heard anyone mention this uncle. Richard continued. "His name is Robert." That name was completely foreign to me. Richard looked down at the table. 10 years ago, Robert was the family's brightest hope. Sharp, charismatic, a decisive businessman. Many people said that if I ever retired, the person taking over Sterling Enterprises wouldn't be Will, but his uncle. I started to understand why no one ever brought him up. The sudden disappearance of a highly anticipated family member is almost always tied to a dark secret. And exactly as I thought, Richard let out a soft sigh. After the Southgate project, Robert moved overseas. Then what? He never came back. My father asked, "Internal conflict?" Richard nodded. At the time, I just thought it was a disagreement on business philosophy. But now I am not so sure. The room fell silent again. If the person Grandmother Margaret was referring to in the audio was Robert, then all of this had started long before I ever married into the Sterling family. It meant my marriage might just be a tiny piece of a much, much larger puzzle. Right then, James's phone rang again. He answered, and about 2 minutes later, looked up. Martha agreed to meet us. I stood up immediately. An hour later, we arrived at a safe house arranged by the police to protect the witness. Martha was sitting at the back of the room. Her face was tired, but her eyes were calmer. The moment she saw Richard, she bowed her head slightly. "Mr. Chairman." Richard shook his head. "Martha, you don't need to call me that anymore." Martha gave a sad smile. "Over 20 years, it's hard to change the habit." Then she turned to look at me. "Emma." I sat down across from her. "What do you want to tell me?" Martha stayed quiet for a long time. Then she unexpectedly pulled a small key out of her pocket. Everyone stared at the object. "This is the key to the old madam's safe." My heart pounded. "A safe?" "Yes." Martha nodded. "The final diary isn't with me." We all froze. James immediately asked, "Then where is it?" Martha looked at me. "The madam locked it away 3 years ago." "Where?" "In her personal safe." I subtly clenched my fists. It turned out, all this time, everyone was hunting down a diary that Martha didn't even have. "Why didn't you say anything sooner?" Martha gave a bitter smile. "Because the madam explicitly ordered me not to say a word until Emma decided to get a divorce." I was paralyzed. Once again. That deceased woman had seen the future. Martha wiped her eyes with a tissue. "The madam used to say, if you still wanted to hold on to your family, that diary shouldn't see the light of day. But if you divorced, the truth had to be known." No one spoke. We all understood what that meant. Some truths, once exposed, completely destroy whatever is left behind. Martha looked at me. "Are you sure you want to know?" I didn't answer right away. So many images flashed through my mind. The day I first met Will, the day I gave birth to Lily, the family dinners, the moments of feeling utterly alone, the desperate attempts to patch things up. Then, the image of Eleanor slapping me at the gala. Finally, I nodded. "I want to know." Martha handed the key to James. "The safe is located in the madam's old estate in the suburbs." Richard looked up. "The Westchester estate." Yes. Richard closed his eyes. Perhaps even he didn't expect the final secret to be hidden there. Later that afternoon, our group headed out. The old house sat in the middle of a massive property, vacant for years since Grandmother Margaret's passing. The sky began to darken, the wind whistling through the branches, creating a rustling sound. I walked into the house with a heavy heart. Many of the old furnishings were exactly as they used to be. The wicker chair she loved to sit in, the faded tea set. The grandfather clock on the wall was still ticking a few minutes behind, just like before. It made me feel as if she was still here. Martha led us up to the second floor. In Grandmother's old bedroom, there was a large wooden armoire. Behind a hidden panel at the back was a metal safe. James used the key to open it. The heavy door swung open. Inside, there was no gold, no jewelry, no property deeds. Just a brown leather-bound notebook and a large envelope. The air in the room seemed to freeze. Martha burst into tears. Richard slumped into a chair. I stood looking at that notebook, my heart hammering in my chest. 3 years. So many secrets, so many conflicts, so much trauma. Perhaps everything was inside there. Just as James reached out to grab the notebook, Richard's phone suddenly blared. He looked at the screen, his expression changing instantly. "It's Will," he answered. The voice on the other end spoke frantically. I couldn't hear clearly, but within seconds, Richard's face went ghost white. "What?" Everyone immediately looked at him. Richard slowly lowered the phone, his lips quivering. I had never seen him lose his composure like this. "What is it, Dad?" I asked. He looked at me, his voice rough. "Your mother-in-law is missing." The room went silent. But what he said next was even more shocking. And before she vanished, she left a note. It only had one line on it. I held my breath. Richard looked at the diary in the safe, then said, "If you want to know who is hurting your mother-in-law, read the last page." Richard's words sucked all the oxygen out of the room. No one spoke immediately, because everyone's eyes were fixed on the diary inside the safe. For the past few days, people were chasing the will, chasing the corporate shares, chasing the drama between me and the Sterling family. But at this exact moment, we realized that maybe all of that was just a smokescreen. The real truth lay where no one expected. James was the first to regain his composure. He put on a pair of gloves and carefully opened the brown leather notebook. The pages inside had yellowed with age. Grandmother Margaret's handwriting was still clear and neat, reflecting the posture of a woman who lived her whole life by strict principles. Richard sat in the chair. My father stood behind him, and I felt my heart beating so loud I could hear every thud. James flipped through the pages. At first, it was just notes on her health, trivial family matters, moments she missed her late husband, and times she played with Lily when she was a baby. One entry made my eyes sting. She wrote, "That little Lily. Every time she smiles, even the adults who are angry with each other have to soften up." I bowed my head. It had been so long since I heard anyone speak of my daughter with such simple, pure love. James kept flipping the pages. The atmosphere in the room grew heavier by the second, until he stopped at the final pages. The handwriting became shakier, the entries shorter, because by then, her health was failing fast. Then, the final page appeared. No one rushed him, no one interrupted, only the soft rustle of paper turning. James read slowly, line by line. May 12th. I overheard a conversation between Robert and a stranger. Richard instantly gripped the armrests of his chair. I didn't want to believe it, but the missing funds from the Southgate project really do tie back to him. I glanced at Richard. He closed his eyes, his face contorted in pain like someone had just ripped open an old wound. James continued. I asked Richard. He said there was no proof. But as a mother, I know. When a person starts avoiding the truth, it means they have already seen it. The room was completely silent. I realized Richard was shaking, not out of anger, but out of guilt. The diary went on. May 27th, I found part of the documents. Robert wasn't the only one who took the money. There is someone else behind him. James paused for a few seconds before reading the next line. That person used to be a strategic partner of Sterling Enterprises. I don't have enough evidence yet, but if anything happens to me, Martha will know what to do. Martha burst into tears, covering her face. For over 3 years, this woman had carried this secret alone. Now I understood why she lived in such fear. James read the last few lines. And then, everyone was left stunned. Robert did not harm me. The person who wants me silenced is someone else. But what breaks my heart the most is not the money. It is the fact that Richard knew his brother was in the wrong all along, but covered it up just to keep the family intact. Richard dropped his head, tears rolling down his face. It was the first time I had ever seen him cry. A man over 60, a man who ran an empire, a man who always maintained his poise, now sitting there like a child who had made a terrible mistake. My father sighed. No blame, no sarcasm. Just a very soft sigh. Because sometimes a father's silence is heavier than any reprimand. But the biggest surprise was in the final line. The ink was pressed darker than the rest. Probably the last time she ever held a pen. If Emma reads this notebook, it means she has endured enough trauma to finally walk away from that marriage. My nose burned. James kept reading. Emma is not weak. She is just too kind. The people making her suffer aren't stronger than her. They are just the ones exploiting that kindness. Tears fell from my eyes before I even realized it. Since walking out of the Sterling house, I had always tried to act strong. But grandmother's words shattered that shell completely. Because finally, someone truly understood me. Not just on the surface, but the things I had never spoken out loud. James closed the notebook. The room sank into silence. A long time later, Richard spoke up. His voice was raspy. It is my fault. No one replied. He looked at me. Emma. I looked up. Yes. I owe you an apology. I stayed silent, he continued. Not because of the shares, not because of the divorce, but because for 5 years I watched you suffer, and I just thought that as long as the family stayed together, it was enough. He bowed his head. I was wrong. I looked at the man. For the first time in years, I didn't see my father-in-law. I just saw a father confronting his own failures. Right then, James's phone rang. He answered it, and about 10 seconds later, stood up abruptly. We found Eleanor. Everyone immediately looked at him. Where? A remote retreat up in the Hudson Valley. I was stunned. Richard was also shocked. What is she doing there? James shook his head. Unclear. But she requested to meet Emma in private. I was surprised. Me? Yes. He looked at me, and she said she will only talk to you. The tension in the room spiked. After everything that had happened, no one understood why Eleanor wanted to see me. My father objected instantly. Absolutely not. I looked at him. Dad. No. He shook his head. It's too dangerous. But James thought for a moment and said, I think we should go. My father turned to him. Why? Because if she wanted to run away, she wouldn't have contacted us. If she wanted to hurt Emma, she wouldn't choose this method. Richard sat quietly, then suddenly said, I understand her. Everyone looked at him. He smiled sadly. Perhaps for the first time in her life, she is actually terrified. That afternoon, my father, James, Richard, and I drove up to an old retreat nestled in the hills of the Hudson Valley. It was late afternoon, the final rays of sun draping over the rustic roofs. The scenery was incredibly serene. An attendant led us to a small room at the back. The door was slightly ajar. My heart pounding, I walked up and gently pushed the door open. Eleanor was sitting inside. It had only been a few days, but the woman who always appeared so immaculate looked as if she had aged a decade. More gray hair was showing. Her face was gaunt, her eyes red from a lack of sleep. She stared at me for a long time, then suddenly broke down crying. Her choked sobs echoed in the small room, completely different from the arrogant mother-in-law I used to know. Her voice shook. Emma. I stood still. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with absolute despair, and uttered a sentence that left everyone outside the door stunned. The person you need to watch out for the most isn't Robert, and it isn't me. It is the person standing right next to you. Eleanor's words made the small room at the back of the retreat feel frozen in time. Even the sound of the wind sweeping through the wooden window frames became sharper. I stood still, looking at the woman who used to be my mother-in-law, looking at her swollen, tear-filled eyes, feeling an indescribable knot in my stomach. For 5 years, I had seen every side of her strict, cruel, overbearing, and arrogant, but I had never seen her this frantic. Richard walked in. Who are you talking about? Eleanor turned to her husband, then back to me. There are things I hid because I thought I could fix them myself. What things? Richard's voice was starting to shake. Eleanor looked down, her hands clutching the hem of her shirt. The person everyone is looking for isn't Robert. But Robert is involved. No one interrupted. She continued. A few years ago, after Margaret died, I got a call from overseas. From Robert, Richard asked. She nodded. He said someone was looking for Margaret's final diary. He told me I had to find it before the other person did. I frowned. Why? Eleanor looked up. Because inside that notebook is the name of the person who orchestrated everything back then. Who is it? She looked at me for a long time, then shook her head. I don't know. The room fell silent. James immediately asked, You don't know? I genuinely don't know. Eleanor laughed a bitter laugh. If I knew, I wouldn't have been running around like this. She explained that after Robert's call, she began secretly investigating. At first, she also thought her brother-in-law was the mastermind behind the Southgate project embezzlement. But the more she dug, the more anomalies she found. There were transactions that even Robert couldn't have authorized on his own. There were signatures that appeared in files, only to vanish from the archives. There were accounts that received money and were closed weeks later. The person pulling the strings seemed to understand Sterling Enterprises inside out, enough to erase almost every trace. My father spoke up slowly. That is why you looked for Martha. Eleanor nodded. I thought she had the diary, until she said she didn't. She looked at me. Emma, I know you won't believe me, but this time, I truly don't want to hurt anyone. I didn't answer, because my mind was chaotic. Part of me wanted to believe her, but part of me remembered all the damage she had caused. Richard suddenly asked, Then why didn't you tell me? Eleanor laughed. A tired, exhausted laugh. Tell you so you could do what? Have you ever believed me? That sentence made Richard fall silent. Because over the years, their marriage, too, was filled with distances outsiders couldn't see. Eleanor wiped her tears. I know I was wrong about Emma. I know I treated her terribly. For the first time, she turned to look straight at me. I am sorry. I stood frozen, not out of shock. But because for 5 years, I never thought the day would come when she would say those 3 words. Her voice choked up. I used to think if you just left the Sterling family, everything would be fine. I used to think I was protecting this family. But the more time passed, the more I realized the person destroying this family wasn't you. Tears fell down her face. It was my own selfishness. The room fell silent. Right at that moment, James's phone buzzed. He checked the screen and instantly stood up. We have a problem. Everyone looked at him. What is it? He opened the file he had just received. My team just verified the data from Sterling's old servers. My heart skipped a beat. James looked at the screen for a few seconds, then turned to Richard. I think you should see this yourself. Richard took the tablet. Just seconds later, his expression changed entirely. I had never seen him look so pale. Impossible, he muttered. What is it, Dad? I asked. Richard looked up, his eyes filled with absolute disbelief. The person who signed off on the final wire transfer for the Southgate project. He stopped. No one breathed. No one blinked. It was Will. I was paralyzed. The entire room went dead silent. Even Eleanor jumped to her feet. No! She shook her head frantically. No, not my son. James stated calmly. We only found the digital signature so far. We are not concluding anything yet. But the shock was still too massive. Because if this were true, the person standing closest to me from the very beginning was Will, the man who used to be my husband, the man who had just told me he knew nothing. Eleanor practically collapsed. No, Will wouldn't do that. He couldn't. But right then, my phone rang. It was Will. I stared at the screen for a few seconds before answering. The background noise on his end was loud. Cars honking, wind whipping. And Will's voice sounded incredibly frantic. Emma! I am here. Where are you? Will breathed heavily. Listen to me. What is it? You have to believe me. My heart sank. That is the phrase people use right before revealing a massive truth. Will continued. The signature on the Southgate files is mine. My whole body stiffened. Eleanor, hearing this from across the room, froze. But Will immediately kept talking. But I didn't know what I was signing. I gripped the phone tighter. Back then, I had just joined the company. Someone handed me the files to sign. I thought it was just standard internal procedure. Who handed them to you? The other end went silent. A long, unnatural pause. Then Will said a name that left everyone in the room stunned. Not Robert. Not Eleanor. Not Richard. It was the person almost no one had paid attention to from the very beginning. The person who rarely showed his face. the person who stayed out of every argument. The person who worked alongside Grandmother Margaret for years. Will spoke softly. It was Tom. The phone almost slipped from my hand. The former driver. The man who showed up at the hospital. The man who took Martha away. The man who tried to run Will over with a motorcycle. Every piece of the puzzle in my head started slamming into place. But before I could say anything, a horrifying sound erupted over the line. The sickening crunch of a massive impact. Screeching tires. People screaming. And the sound of a phone clattering onto the asphalt. "Will!" I screamed. No one answered. Only the chaotic sounds of the street echoed through the speaker. Then, the call abruptly disconnected. The room fell into a terrifying silence, because everyone understood. Someone had just realized that Will was remembering what happened all those years ago, and that person did not want him to speak again. The moment Will's call cut off amidst the screeching tires and chaotic screams, my heart felt like it was being squeezed in a vice. Over the past few days, I had mentally prepared myself to end this marriage, learned how to let go of old wounds, and practice living as an independent woman, not relying on anyone. But hearing that sound, I realized that between me and Will, there was still something undeniable, the genuine youth and time we had once shared. No one said another word. James and I immediately left the retreat. Richard and Eleanor followed in their car behind us. For the entire drive back to New York City, the atmosphere was so heavy, no one spoke. Eleanor sat in the back seat, her hands tightly gripping her rosary beads, her face vacant. It was the first time I saw her not as a woman obsessively trying to control everything, but simply as a mother terrified for her only son. When we arrived at the hospital, Will had already been taken into the emergency room. The accident wasn't as fatal as my worst nightmares, but he had suffered head trauma and a fractured collarbone from being thrown onto the pavement. The driver who caused the crash had fled the scene. However, traffic cameras caught the license plate. 3 hours of waiting outside the ER were the longest 3 hours I had experienced in years. Richard sat quietly on a bench, his gray hair seeming to multiply in a single afternoon. Eleanor didn't cry out loud, but her eyes were bloodshot. At times, she would look at me and then look down, as if wanting to say something but not knowing how to start. Around 9:00 p.m., the doctor came out and announced that Will was out of danger. Everyone breathed a collective sigh of relief. Right then, James's phone rang. He listened for about a minute, then turned to us. The police found the driver. I immediately asked, "Who is it?" "It's Tom." No one was surprised anymore. From the moment that name came out of Will's mouth during his final call, we had all somewhat guessed it. But the next sentence shocked everyone. He was arrested while trying to leave the city. And inside his car, they found documents related to the Southgate project. Richard closed his eyes. He didn't say a word, because after all these years, the secret was finally coming to light. In the days that followed, the truth was pieced together from multiple angles. Tom wasn't just a driver. Before working for Eleanor, he had been a records manager for a partner company of Sterling Enterprises. During the Southgate project, he colluded with outside entities to funnel money through dummy accounts. Robert discovered part of this scheme but didn't have the power to stop it, so he left the U.S. After clashing with Tom and a few other executives, Grandmother Margaret was the first to track down the paper trail. That was why she secretly gathered evidence, and that was why she created a will to protect the people she trusted most. What surprised me the most was that Will truly had nothing to do with it. His signature ended up on the files because he was young and naive at the time, signing internal protocol documents without realizing he was becoming the final link in an altered paper trail. Once everything became clear, the police launched a full investigation. Tom confessed to most of the charges. Several former partners of Sterling Enterprises were subpoenaed. The legal battle dragged on for months, but eventually, justice was served. As for my marriage to Will, there was no going back. One early autumn afternoon, as the trees in Central Park began changing colors, Will and I appeared at the courthouse to finalize our divorce. No screaming, no fighting, no bitter words. Everything went surprisingly peacefully. I received full custody of Lily. Will retained visitation rights according to the law. The condo was divided fairly. The funds I had contributed were fully returned. And the shares Grandmother Margaret left me remained exactly as stated in her will. After signing the papers, we walked out of the courthouse together. The weather was beautiful that day. Will stood on the steps looking at me for a long time before smiling faintly. I really thought we would grow old together. I smiled back. I thought so too. He nodded. I'm sorry. I looked at the man who used to be my husband. This time, There was no pain. Just a sense of relief. I forgive you. Will's eyes watered. Thank you, Emma. That was the last conversation we ever had as husband and wife. A year later, many things had changed. Richard stepped down as CEO of the corporation, spending more time with his family. Eleanor was no longer the sharp, imposing woman she once was. After the crisis, she became heavily involved in charity work and occasionally came over to visit Lily. What surprised me the most was that her transformation was genuine, not out of fear, not because she lost her power, but because for the first time in her life, she understood the consequences of extreme selfishness and control. Once, while sitting next to Lily in the park, she turned to me and said, "I owe you so much." I just smiled. Because some debts don't need to be paid in cash. Acknowledging you were wrong is enough. As for me, I continued my career. I lived a normal life, dropping my daughter off at school, eating simple dinners with my dad. The shares grandmother left me ensured a secure future for Lily. But the most valuable thing I gained wasn't assets. It was the lesson of self-worth. I used to think endurance meant preserving a family. I used to think silence was sacrifice. I used to think that as long as I was a good person, others would treat me well. But life taught me that while kindness is precious, it must come with boundaries. A woman can love her family, can be forgiving, can be patient, but she must never lose the respect she holds for herself. That afternoon, Lily and I took a walk by the lake. She held my hand, chattering away about everything that happened at school. Golden sunlight spilled across the water, the breeze gently swaying the trees. Lily looked up and asked, "Mommy, are you happy?" I looked at my daughter, looking at those clear, innocent eyes that were exactly the same as they were back then, and smiled. "Yes, I am. Why, Mommy?" I bent down and kissed her forehead. "Because I have you, Lily," she giggled. The sound of her laughter echoed through the peaceful afternoon. I suddenly remembered Grandmother Margaret. I remembered the line she wrote. "That little Lily is like the sunlight in the house." It was true. After all the storms had passed, that sunlight was still here, and so was I. No longer the submissive daughter-in-law from years ago. No longer the terrified woman too scared to walk away from an unhappy marriage. But a mother, a daughter, a woman who knows how to love herself and knows she deserves to be respected. Sometimes a breakup is not an endpoint, but a door opening to a new life. And sometimes, true happiness isn't about keeping someone by your side forever. It's about ensuring that after all the trauma, you still retain your kindness, your integrity, and the courage to keep moving forward. Ladies and gentlemen, today's story has come to a close, but what lingers behind is perhaps not just a broken marriage, a family secret exposed, or a shocking will. The true reflection lies in how each person chose to confront their mistakes, their pain, and the crossroads of life. In this world, there are times we think the things that hurt us the most are betrayal, loss, or the injustices we suffer. But as years pass, many realize that what weighs the heaviest on the human heart is not the wounds inflicted by others, but the peace we lose by holding on to resentment. Forgiveness isn't given because others deserve it, but because we ourselves deserve to live with a lighter heart. Emma's story reminds us of a very simple truth. Kindness is an incredibly precious gift, but being kind doesn't mean allowing others to trample on your worth. A good person isn't someone who yields unconditionally, but someone who knows when to love, who to forgive, and how to protect their own beautiful values when necessary. Furthermore, family love remains the root of everything. Children should respect their parents, but parents must also learn to love their children through understanding rather than control. Sometimes, an offhand comment that seems trivial can leave a scar in a loved one's heart for years. A family is only truly a home when there is respect, listening, and grace for one another. No one in this life is perfect. Eleanor was wrong. Richard was wrong. Will had regrets. But what is truly commendable is that when faced with the truth, they learn to look at themselves. People are not entirely defined by the mistakes they make. The greatest tragedy is knowing you are wrong but lacking the courage to change. And after everything, what endures the longest is human connection. Money can be lost and made again. Status shifts with time. Power eventually yields to old age. Only genuine love, and the bonds built on kindness, are the true treasures that walk with us to the very end of our lives. Thank you for listening to today's story. May each of us cherish our families while we still can, love while we still have the chance, and live kindly while we still have the time. Because in the end, the value of a lifetime isn't measured by what we owned, but by the warmth and love we left behind in the hearts of others.